Hello everyone, and somewhat belatedly, happy 2018. Today's video is going to be something of a personal one. A little bit of me talking about myself, a little housekeeping, and a minor mission statement going forward in the next year. Somewhat of a talky one this. Not much on the visual side going on here today, but I figure you all used to that by now. So a while back, I made a video talking about a particular sort of person you run into online. That is young, straight, white guys, usually teenagers or in their early 20s, who are opposed to feminism and social justice, and who are the primary recruiting target for fascists and white nationalists. I talked about how they feel left out of current social narratives, and how the path to fascism and white nationalism for them is a relatively easy one, full of reassurance and simple to understand racialized answers for all the world's problems. And I ended that video by posing a question. What are the best tactics for reaching these people before they become red-pilled, as they would say? Red-pilled is kind of an odd term there from The Matrix, where protagonist Neo takes a red pill and wakes up to find his existence so far has been a lie, and the world is actually run by robotic and squids. And the real world parallel to this is waking up to find the world is run by women and minorities and a nefarious Jewish conspiracy or something. It's all very silly, of course. Now, why these people chose to pilfer their metaphors from a story written by two trans women in which a white internet nerd learns the truth about society from a black man kind of escapes, really. But regardless, the question, what can we do to reach these guys before they fall down the suggested video's rabbit hole and end up watching and agreeing with blatant white nationalist propaganda? You be watching Sargon of Akkad 1 minute, and then a few autoplays later, you re-listening to Richard Spencer. And anyone who spends a significant amount of time listening to people like Sargon is going to be very ill-equipped to argue against white nationalism, as indeed Sargon himself is. There's a reason that Richard Spencer considers people like Sargon to be good entry points to fascism. It's because they peddle the same alarmist nonsense that he does. Even if they would go so far as to describe themselves as fascists or start throwing Hitler salutes or something, they still training their audiences to respond to white nationalist arguments. And it's a relatively simple progression to go from someone like Sargon, who complains constantly about women and immigrants and progressives, social justice warriors and leftists in general, to someone like Spencer, who simply agrees with all of that and says, well, maybe men should start doing something about something. I'm also going to be talking about my own experience with politics online. In the video I mentioned earlier, I briefly noted that he used to be one of the people he was describing, and I hope obviously I'm not anymore. So maybe there an answer hidden somewhere in my own experiences. I was fortunate enough to break out of that alarmist feedback loop early on. So maybe by thinking about that a little, we can come up with a few pointers for breaking other people out of it. But first, I guess I should give me elevator pitch for reaching out to these people in the first place. And I have a three-pronged argument here. First up is the standard Mr. Rogers, let all hold hands and get along thing, If we all work together, we can do anything, all that good stuff. But more interesting and immediate though, let's talk tactics. Now, we lefty social justice types understand social concepts like power and privilege. Now, there's a reason that straight white men, like me, tend to do better on social media, YouTube, and so on, with viewing figures and reach. And it's because I have a privilege they're not afforded to other sorts of people. even if they re-saying the exact same things I am. And all I can do about that is acknowledge it and try to put it to some good use, I suppose. So this is me second point. Straight white cis male voices are amplified right now. And that's obviously something we should work on changing, of course, by boosting the voices of other people. However, with regards to the sorts of people I'm talking about, they are far more likely to initially respond to straight white male voices. You know, they've mostly already been conditioned against listening to what old people and people of color and other social minorities have to say about things. So straight white guys are probably our biggest in with that crowd. And my third point is also a tactical one. In a voting habits, political wing sense, straight white guys are far more likely to fall in the conservative right-wing camp than other sorts of people. If you can reach people in this demographic and introduce a little nuance and perspective into their worldview, you won't only have gained enemy, you all have neutralized a potential opponent. You know, just looking at the numbers there, it makes good sense. However, a little clarification before I start doling out advice here. I am talking specifically to those people in the audience who have already decided that reaching out to these people is a good idea. I'm not saying everyone has to spend their time and energy doing this, because obviously a lot of these kids are not coming as open-minded neutral parties who just need a kind word to nudge them in the right direction. They often coming as belligerent little shits who all throw a tantrum and spam you with insults. Now obviously, nobody should have to deal with that. So if it's your own decision to shut these people out, that's understandable and fair enough. And this is partially why white guys are best situated to reach out to these people, I guess. They've got considerably fewer insults at hand when they dealing with people who they feel are like themselves. And speaking of belligerent little shits, I'll now paint a picture of myself about 10 years ago when I was a teenager heading off to university. There I am there. How cute. Now I was and am, I suppose, a straight white cis free passes. So top of the privilege heap in all of those regards, but relatively poor. So there was an economic pressure there. And like a lot of teenagers, I was insecure, unsure of myself, prone to bouts of sadness and uncontrollable emotions and so on. So to me at the time, anyone suggesting I was personally privileged in any regard would have been dismissed out of hand. You know, I didn't understand the wider context there, or know enough about society or history to comprehend that concept. All I knew were my own experiences. I frequently felt sad, lonely, jealous, small, and I was broke all the time. So being a straight white guy clearly isn't privileging me in any real way. I would have said, now my political views at the time were in the path of least resistance towards not having to think about the problem any more vain. You know I didn't identify as a bigot in any way, and I would have staunchly denied that if accused. But that didn't stop me from saying and thinking things like, sexism ended when women got the vote, and all races are equal under the law now, so there's no discrimination anymore. You know, things like that. I was bigoted from passive ignorance rather than active hatred, but bigoted all the same. But bigger than active If I was asked if women were the equal of men, I would have said yes, of course they are. And they have the same legal rights as men, and therefore feminism is outdated now. You know, feminists are just fringe lunatics who want women to rule over men or whatever. That was the idea of feminism that I'd picked up just from general cultural osmosis without having put any real thought into it. I was also an early fan of the atheists debunking creationism videos here online. It made me feel smart to see some yoon dismantling someone else's beliefs like that. Even though obviously looking back, debunking creationism is relatively easy and doesn't really require all that much effort. You see, my own point of pride at the time, falsely held, I later came to realize was me intelligence. You know, I might be broken, lonely, and bored, but I'm smart. You know, I'm smarter than me parents. I'm smarter than me teachers and peers and friends and the girls who want to go out with me and the creationists and the feminists. You know, I'm the best at that one thing. That's what I get to have. And I responded positively to anything that made me feel smarter than other people. Now, staking everything on one aspect of your personality like that is setting yourself up for a fall, obviously. And I'm very lucky that YouTube didn't exist in its current form back then, as I was exactly the sort of person who, desperate for validation, would have followed the breadcrumb trail of laughing at creationists to laughing at feminists to laughing at just the left and social justice in general. I'd be just another Sargon fan, probably. And the constant laughing at feminists would become, over time, believing in some feminist social justice warrior conspiracy to take over society. And then we redoing something brave and transgressive in laughing at feminists online. We re-saving Western civilization from the zombie hordes. Now, it's silly, but it's an attractive narrative for a bored and lonely young man who needs something to believe in and a community he feels he belongs to. My initial first-hand experience of feminism and social justice came on the Something Awful forums. Something Awful, for the uninitiated, is a paid internet forum. For that is up to it's something for union offered fuffle. That is, you pay to sign up and be able to post, and if you break the rules and get banned, you have to pay again to get back in. Now, I was a very active SAP poster back in the day and would spend a lot of my free time reading the threads in their debate and discussion forum. SAS payment on sign-up meant that the level of discourse was a little bit higher than elsewhere online. Obviously, kids without access to a credit card couldn't sign up and spam a bunch of nonsense. And compared to the rest of the internet, anyway, the moderation is fairly quick and active. Not that there aren't racists, fascists, except on the SA forums, because there are, but they generally have to be smart in flying under the radar to not get their accounts banned. It's a bit like a scaled-down version of what we have on Twitter and YouTube today, with cryptos trying to pander to the fascist crowd without going too far and getting themselves shut down. On the whole, though, something awful was pretty progressive. Now, one thread I frequented rather regularly was the Feminismiga thread. I first clicked on this thread not as some open-minded youngster looking to learn more about what feminism was. I clicked on it in order to laugh at the crazy feminists and their silly beliefs. And instead, what I found there was absolutely terrifying. It was a group of women talking about things, uninterrupted by men. Sometimes they'd even talk about men and the annoying things that men do. And I can't imagine a scarier scenario for a fragile young man than to be awfully on the wall as a group of women discuss male shortcomings. Now, the most embarrassing moments for me were when they would discuss a behavior that I knew I'd taken part in the past. Until then, if asked if women were the equal of men, as I mentioned before, I would have said yes, but I wouldn't have necessarily believed it, deep down and subconsciously. And confronted with the reality of women being able to understand things just as well as them, or even worse, being able to understand things better than to be thinking things unthought by them, and to be judging me for my behavior based on a set of rules I could not see or understand. It's a horror. It was a direct challenge to me intelligence, which was by far the main pillar of me identity, and I reacted as you'd expect, by calmly accepting their arguments and modifying me behavior going forward. Just kidding, of course. I rejected it all outright, obviously. However, from then on, I started paying more attention to me interactions with women. Taking more attention, I from you, then why I mentioned I couldn't help it. The ideas were in my head at that point, and I noticed myself doing things that the women in the thread would criticize, and I started to think to myself, maybe I am faster to start explaining something to a woman than to a man. Maybe I do unconsciously assume men are more competent. How many times have I just sat there going on at some woman about something she knew more than me about while she just smiled politely? And even thinking about it now, writing this years later, it makes me cringe, honestly. It took me a long time to come to terms with all this, obviously. I changed me opinions slowly and piece by piece, and it seems odd that such a small thing as clicking on a forum thread could have been the catalyst for such a big change in my political outlook, but it was. I kept reading that thread and the arguments they had and read the authors they suggested. I didn't agree with everything I read, certainly not at the beginning anyway, but what I did agree with made good sense to me. The illusion of the feminists as fringe lunatics had been shattered. So me first note here, personal change often happens privately over time, behind the scenes. If you can get the ideas out there, and they re the right ideas, of course, they all grow and bear fruit over time. So don't get disheartened if you can't reach someone right away. It might take them months, or in me case it was years, to talk themselves around to it. And that's often the case with people who think they re smarter than they were. They have to wait a while so they can con themselves into thinking they changed their own mind, you know. And the second point I want to mention about that feminism thread is that it was not by any means a hive mind. It was actually full of very lively and sometimes very rowdy arguments. There were lots of different kinds of feminists arguing for different things, and that by itself can be illuminating to come into contact with. It's easy to caricature a political opponent by being very selective in what of them you present to your audience. A lot of the fans of various anti-feminist YouTubers will not even be aware that in-group disagreements happen between feminists or what they would call SJOs. They'll be working with the anti-feminist group definitions, which say all feminists and SJOs are in lockstep and are fairly represented by the fringe annoying people contained within each group, presenting a united front against that can be counterproductive, I feel. So I'm here going to acknowledge the various annoying things about feminism and social justice online. In my opinion, I should say, first off, there are the trans-exclusionary radical feminists. That's transphobic people who call themselves feminists, but are much more interested in using feminism as a shield to hide behind while they attack trans people. I'm not a fan of them at all. There are certain, what I guess you could call liberal feminists, who see feminism as mindless veneration of women. You know, people who all celebrate Margaret Thatcher or whoever else just because they happened to be a woman. There are some male feminists who are just claiming to be so to get laid. There are racist feminists. Feminists who attack sex workers. The very rare, in earnest, all sexes rape, kill all men extremist. And of course, there are people who are maybe just having a bad day, who do something embarrassing or cringe-worthy in public and get recorded and memified. All these people do exist. And if I or anyone else wanted to, they could cherry-pick examples out of those groups all day, strip off all the labels except feminist, and make a very lucrative YouTube channel making fun of them. The truth, though, for me anyway, just speaking for myself here, is that none of those groups fairly represent what feminism is. I mention them here to say to any fans of anti-feminist YouTubers who are watching, yes, I get that those people exist, but they re not nearly every feminist. They re a minority. Feminists are actually a diverse grouping of people all with different opinions, not some monolithic hive mind. And this leads me to my next point. As far as possible, when attempting to reach the demographic I am talking about anyway, avoid using labels. Now, we never call myself a feminist for a couple of reasons. The first being that I don't think I should self-apply that identity, but also because it's a very easy online to get mired in discussion of what particular labels mean, like I did just a minute ago. And then you never get around to discussing the ideas behind those labels. These young white guys have been pre-programmed to laugh and open up the memes folder when they see words like feminist or socialist, even if they reworking with a false picture of what it is they reattacking. And worse is if they don't recognize the political labels you were using because that makes them feel unintelligent, which is the worst thing of all. Better is to pitch them ideas phrased as simply as possible, and also that seem devoid of any particular identity or allegiance. I think that's a sustainable long-term strategy for building political bridges. No, ultimately you do need labels to define things. I am strictly talking icebreakers here. Just trying to land a couple of sticky arguments in their minds, and then hopefully leaving them to do the rest. As an example here, you can have the socialism versus capitalism debate online all day, but you will always run into the same problem. In a room with 10 people in it, you will be working with 7 different definitions of what socialism means, from modern European-style social democracies all the way to Stalinist Russia. Perhaps more effective to our specific audience here anyway is to simply point out problems with our current economic system. It's very hard to argue against the fact that capitalism should be criticized. We don't need to compare it to anything else to do that either. It has flaws all on its own. And just getting certain people used to the idea capitalism is not perfect and can be criticized is enough. For now anyway. Either they all do the rest themselves, in which case great, or at the very least they'll be less heated opponents. Now this is, of course, the same tactic the smarter members of the alt-right are currently engaged in, arguing the concept of race realism, which is their in vogue euphemism for racism but acceptable. They trying to get whoever will listen used to the idea of classifying and organizing people by race. And that's the Trojan horse for their real argument, which is therefore it's okay to discriminate against people. They repackaging their arguments to be more attractive to the average person. And we should not shy away from doing the same. Now the difference here is that we will just freely admit to doing that. That you will just, yes, that's what I'm doing. I'm using words and arguments and rhetoric to try to change people's minds. There's no fortune plotting or secret discord organizing necessary here. I want to change people's minds. I'm hoping people will be appreciative of that honesty instead of seeing it as maliciously manipulative or something. So about that fortune plotting there, this tees into my next piece of advice, which seems rather obvious, I guess, but anyway, here it is. Don't fall into traps. And I want to talk about the "it's okay to be white" campaign here, which credit where credit's due is a clever bit of manipulation. It exploited both a liberal blind spot and the media's love of anything racially charged. Now we understand the arguments against the "it's okay to be white" slogan. At firstly, it was obviously initiated by white nationalists, which should be a bit of a tip-off. Even if you don't have a problem with the slogan, you should probably wonder where it's coming from and why. Secondly, white nationalism is harmful to white identities. There were lots of different groups of white people, all with their own histories, and white nationalists strip away all of the specifics and just stamp the label white over everything. It's okay to be white normalizes this idea of identifying as simply white. Also, saying it's okay to be white as a statement implies an attack on whiteness that necessitates the statement being said in the first place. It legitimizes the idea that white people are somehow under attack. It's difficult to get all of this into a tweet, however. The bad thing to do is to try to cleverly flip the slogan back on them. It's not okay to be white. Even if you follow that up with a truckload of explanation, it's gonna get clipped out of context. And that's what they want after all. All we need is a couple of people to say that, a few university professors to fumble their words in response, and the people who came up with this thing will feel validated. We're just handing them ammo at that point. The only way to neutralize something like this is to explain it. You know, here's where it came from. Here, who shared it. Here's what they were aiming to achieve with it. Don't engage with it directly in the way they want you to, please. You know, don't let them define the boundaries of the argument. When you see something like this in future, and there will be something like this in future, don't engage with it face on. Just pull back a bit and explain what's going on. Now, as well as not falling into the alt-right traps, there are a few behaviors you see on the left that aren't going to go over well with the particular demographic I'm talking about. Now, speaking as a straight white cis man, it's the best start to any sentence there. Jokes about white people and straight people and cis people, which you do see occasionally, don't really bother me. Which is C D C C C D A O we I way I say I way I Because to me, it's a triviality. You know, my feelings can't really be hurt there for a few reasons. Firstly, because I don't really peg me self-worth to any of those labels. But secondly, because making fun of cis people or straight people or whatever carries as much relative weight to mocking trans people or gay people as mocking Capricorns, say, there's no power or threat looming behind the words. But that's just how we see it now. You know, it took me a long time to come around to that way of thinking. This sort of thing leaves a lot of straight white cis guys feeling an object of ridicule. You know, shut out in the cold. It's say you worry me enemy, and you can't understand me, and don't even bother trying. Now, I'm not even necessarily asking anyone to change this behavior. Again, I am addressing people who've already settled on trying to appeal to this demographic. But I am worried about the implications of shutting the door on these kids. You know, you never hear anyone say, "It's not me job to educate you about white nationalism, do you?" They reclamoring to talk to anyone who will listen. And of course, unless you happen to be a teacher, it's not your job to educate anyone about anything, especially if they re being a particularly hostile student. But we don't need that educating to be done by someone, eventually. And if they want to do it themselves, then it will have to be someone else. On YouTube, it's easy for me and others to simply tear down their idols. Anti-feminist and alt-right YouTubers require little additional effort to make look silly. And I have had a lot of people reach out to me to say me videos pointing out the errors in the arguments of Molyneux or Sargon or whoever else led them to reconsider their politics. So there is value in that, and I am going to keep doing it. But there's also a chance right now for me and other creators to establish our own narrative here on YouTube. Rather than just reacting to someone else. Too many creators on YouTube, whatever their politics, I'm not naming any names here, tend to get hung up responding to just one individual out of some personal vendetta, however justified they have against them. And that really isn't the best use of our time. Even if you make the perfect video which completely disgraces some anti-feminist or whoever else in the eyes of their followers, they'll just be replaced by someone else tomorrow. The desire for their type of content still exists, regardless of what they do as individuals, and that's the real problem. However, the desire is also clearly there for more leftist voices on the platform. So I'll repeat me call from a while back. If you want to get started, now is a great time. Now, over the course of the next few years in particular, leftist YouTube is going to grow massively. So make a video and share it. It's a lot of fun. So this is going to be me plan going forward in 2018. More political videos that approach various topics from the left with the aim of building up a library of material there, lure them in with the debunking videos, and then the suggested video feature hits them with a lecture about privatization or something. That's me sneaky plan, which I've just given away, I realize. Thanks a lot for watching this meandering mess, folks. It's a bit of an odd video today, but me patrons wanted to see it, and I'm willingly a slave to their desires. I hope there was something you were able to take from it, at least. Now, don't worry if you reach someone who cannot spare the mental energy to attempt to appeal to the demographic I've been talking about. If you reach someone the alt-right hates by virtue of whatever you happen to be, simply existing and being awesome is a good counter-argument in and of itself. And a final note here. Intersectionality is really important. Where the alt-right break people into small groups, we should bring them together. And then we'll definitely have them beat on the numbers, at least. So, be intersectional, is me last bit of advice. Thanks, as always, to all me supporters over on Patreon. Have you noticed the new credits, by the way? We have new credits now by Jen. This should solve the problem with the scrolling, hopefully. And here's how they work. If you pledge at the credits tier, then the month after your pledge began, you all start appearing in the credits of videos. So everyone who pledged at the credits tier after I created it, your name will start appearing in next month's videos. This is to stop people pledging with a silly name and then dropping out before the end of the month. You see, I've had a few of those. Okay, folks, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.